Crystal light fractured over linen tables as she balanced 4 plates, smile steady, steps precise. 3 men sat apart, same tense shoulders. 1 drummed a countdown, 1 watched the exit, 1 blocked the corridor. She whispered, 15 minutes. 5 phones buzzed. 2 glasses of red stopped midair, and room forgot to breathe. Some warnings cost more than you can imagine. The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the marble floor of Romano's, Chicago's most exclusive restaurant where reservations required connections money couldn't buy. Sarah Mitchell balanced 4 plates along her left arm, her movements precise after 18 months of serving the city's most dangerous elite. The dining room hummed with whispered deals and calculated laughter, each table a theater of power wrapped in white linen and flickering candles. Table 7 wanted their wine decanted. The senator's wife at table 12 was complaining about the temperature again. But Sarah's attention kept drifting to the 3 men who'd arrived separately over the past hour, each claiming different tables, each carrying the same tension in their shoulders. Earth to Sarah, Maria's voice cut through her observations. Your regular is here. Vincent Torino occupied table 15 as he had every Thursday for the past 6 months. 6 feet of controlled violence wrapped in Italian silk, his presence transformed the restaurant's atmosphere like a storm system moving through clear skies. Other diners unconsciously lowered their voices when he passed. Waitstaff moved with extra precision around his table. Even the sommelier's hands trembled slightly when pouring his wine. Sarah approached with the bottle of Barolo he always ordered, vintage 1997, worth more than her monthly rent. His gray eyes tracked her movement with the predatory awareness of someone who'd survived in a world where observation meant survival. Good evening, Mr. Torino. Sarah. His voice carried the weight of old money and older violence. You seem distracted tonight. The observation sent ice through her veins. In Vincent's world, being noticed meant being vulnerable. She'd learned to read the subtle signs that separated ordinary wealthy customers from the truly dangerous ones. The way he always sat facing the exits, how his jacket hung slightly loose on the left side, the deference other powerful men showed him despite his relatively young age of 34. Just busy, she replied, pouring wine with steady hands despite her racing pulse. Vincent's attention shifted to something behind her. A muscle in his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The man at table 8. How long has he been watching me? Sarah followed his gaze without turning her head, using the reflection in the wine glass to observe. Expensive suit, nervous energy, fingers drumming against his thigh in patterns that suggested countdown timing. His position offered clear sight lines to Vincent's usual exit route through the kitchen corridor. About 40 minutes. He's ordered 3 drinks but hasn't touched any of them. And the gentleman at the bar? The second watcher was more subtle, nursing the same whiskey for over an hour while maintaining perfect awareness of the main entrance. His posture suggested military training, the kind of discipline that came from years of waiting for orders to kill. Professional, Sarah said quietly. They're not here for dinner. Vincent set down his wine glass with deliberate care. No, they're not. The third man had positioned himself near the restrooms with visual access to the service entrance staff used for deliveries and emergency exits. Sarah's psychology degree had taught her to recognize coordinated behavior, and these 3 moved with the synchronized timing of predators closing a trap. Your usual exit, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They're covering it. Something shifted in Vincent's expression. A calculation that spoke of decisions made in the space between heartbeats. He reached into his jacket with movements too controlled for casual adjustment, withdrawing his phone and typing a message with surgical precision. 15 minutes, he said without looking up. They're planning something for 15 minutes from now. Sarah's training in behavioral analysis had prepared her to recognize pre-attack anxiety. The synchronized checking of watches, the way all 3 men had stopped their nervous habits simultaneously, settling into the stillness that preceded violence. She'd studied enough criminal psychology to understand that coordinated surveillance meant coordinated action. The phone call, she said, remembering fragments of conversation she'd overheard from table 8. I heard him say something about package delivery and timing. Vincent's gray eyes sharpened with lethal focus. Package delivery. How quaint. The euphemism sent chills through Sarah's understanding. In the sanitized language of professional killers, packages weren't delivered. They were eliminated. The coordination, the timing, the strategic positioning, Everything pointed toward an assassination attempt timed for Vincent's usual departure. "What do you want me to do?" The question escaped before she could consider the implications of asking. "Nothing." His voice carried absolute authority. "This doesn't concern you." But it did concern her. Somewhere between serving him wine and recognizing the trap closing around him, Sarah had crossed an invisible line. Whether from genuine concern or simple human decency, she couldn't stand by and watch murder unfold in calculated silence. "The kitchen service entrance," she said quietly. "There's a delivery door that opens onto the alley behind the building. Staff entrance, no cameras, no foot traffic after 10. Vincent studied her with the intensity of someone re-evaluating a previously dismissed threat. "Why are you telling me this?" The question hung between them like a blade waiting to fall. Sarah understood that her answer would determine not just Vincent's survival, but her own future in a world where knowledge meant complicity and silence meant safety. Because whatever you are, you don't deserve to die in an ambush. The admission carried more weight than she'd intended. Vincent Torino was dangerous, possibly evil, certainly criminal, but he was also someone who'd treated her with more respect than most customers, who'd never made her feel invisible or expendable, who tipped generously and remembered her name in a profession where anonymity was the norm. Vincent's phone buzzed once, a response to his earlier message. Within seconds, Sarah noticed movement at the edges of her vision. New customers entering through the main entrance, their casual clothes failing to disguise the predatory awareness in their movements. Vincent's people, arriving like shadows given substance. "The delivery door," Vincent said quietly. "Show me." Sarah led him through the dining room with the practiced efficiency of someone navigating familiar territory. Other staff members noted their passage without curiosity. Customers occasionally requested tours of the wine cellar or kitchen, though usually not customers whose presence commanded the kind of deference Vincent received. The kitchen buzzed with controlled chaos, chefs orchestrating the dinner service with military precision. Sarah guided Vincent past the prep stations toward the rear of the building, where a steel door marked "Deliveries Only" opened onto the service alley. 15 feet to the street, she said, indicating the route. "Turn left, there's a parking garage entrance 50 yards down. Your car? We'll be waiting." Vincent's hand found the small of her back, a gesture that might have seemed protective, if not for the calculated way he positioned himself between her and potential threats. "Sarah." She turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they stood in the narrow corridor, how the kitchen's heat made the air between them feel electric with possibility and danger. "This conversation never happened," he said. "You never saw anything unusual tonight. You served dinner, collected your tips, and went home to your apartment on Webster Street." The casual mention of her address sent new fear through her understanding. Vincent Torino knew where she lived, had probably known for months, along with details about her life she'd never shared. In his world, information was ammunition, and everyone was a potential target. "I understand." "No," Vincent said quietly. "You don't, but you will." The service alley stretched before them like a concrete canyon, shadows pooling between dumpsters and delivery trucks. Vincent moved with predatory grace, his expensive shoes silent against wet pavement. Sarah followed 3 steps behind, her heart hammering against her ribs as the reality of her situation crystallized. She'd just helped a mafia boss escape an assassination attempt. There would be consequences. "Your car?" she asked, scanning the empty street beyond the alley mouth. 2 blocks east. Black sedan, bulletproof glass, driver trained in evasive maneuvers. Vincent's casual recitation of security measures sent chills through her understanding. This wasn't paranoia. This was standard operating procedure for someone whose enemies possessed military-grade resources. They reached the street without incident, but Vincent's tension didn't diminish. His eyes swept parked cars, rooftops, shadows between buildings with the systematic precision of someone for whom relaxation meant death. Sarah found herself adopting his vigilance, noting details she'd never considered threatening before. The homeless man across the street who kept checking his phone. The delivery van with tinted windows idling at the corner. The way streetlights created pools of visibility separated by dangerous darkness. There, Vincent indicated a sedan that materialized from traffic with timing too perfect for coincidence. The driver's window lowered slightly, revealing harsh features and cold eyes that assessed Sarah with professional evaluation. Another killer, she realized. Vincent's world was populated entirely by predators. Mr. Torino, The driver's voice carried Eastern European accent wrapped around barely contained violence. "We have a situation. Status report. 3-man team at Romano's has been neutralized. 2 additional vehicles circling the block. Someone leaked your schedule, sir. This wasn't random." Sarah's knees threatened to buckle as the implications crashed over her. Neutralized meant murdered. The 3 watchers she'd identified were dead, killed with efficiency that suggested Vincent's people had been prepared for exactly this scenario. How many others had died while she stood in that alley? How much blood was on her hands for providing the warning that triggered the violence? Vincent noticed her pallor with the sharp attention he applied to everything. "Sarah needs transport to a secure location." "Sir?" The driver's confusion was evident. Civilian involvement clearly violated established protocols. She identified the surveillance team before they could complete their objective. That makes her a witness to tonight's failed operation. Torelli's people will assume she's working with us now. The casual way Vincent discussed her transformation from innocent bystander to marked target made Sarah's stomach lurch with terror and fury. She'd saved his life, and his response was to drag her deeper into a world where survival required complicity and murder. "I want to go home," she said, hating how her voice shook with barely controlled panic. "Your apartment was compromised 40 minutes ago. Security footage shows 2 men picking your locks while you were still serving dinner. They're waiting for you to return." The statement hit her like physical violence. Her sanctuary, the small studio apartment she'd worked double shifts to afford, had been violated by strangers whose intentions were undoubtedly lethal. Everything she'd built, every semblance of normal life, had been stripped away because she'd chosen to warn someone about impending danger. "This is insane." The words exploded from her with more force than intended. "I served you wine. I noticed some weird customers. That doesn't make me part of your world." Vincent's gray eyes reflected streetlight like polished steel. "The moment you spoke to me about those men, you became part of my world. There's no neutrality in this business, Sarah. You're either an asset or a liability. Assets survive. Liabilities disappear." The brutal honesty of his assessment left no room for illusion. Vincent Torino was offering protection, but protection that came with chains. She could accept his help and surrender her autonomy, or maintain her independence and face professional killers with nothing but naive hope for salvation. "What happens if I refuse?" "I drive away. You walk home to the men waiting in your apartment. By morning, you'll be another unsolved missing person case that Chicago PD files under, probably gang-related." Sarah's psychology training had taught her to recognize manipulation tactics, but Vincent wasn't manipulating her. He was stating facts with the dispassionate clarity of someone who'd seen idealistic civilians destroyed by their inability to accept ugly realities. Her choices had been reduced to survival or principle, and principle was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Where would you take me?" "Safe house, north side, discreet security, comfortable accommodations, time to figure out our next move." Our next move. The possessive pronoun carried implications that made her skin crawl with unwanted awareness. Vincent was claiming ownership over her decisions, her future, her very existence. But what alternative did she have? Return to Romano's and pretend tonight never happened? Pack her belongings and flee Chicago with nothing but savings account that wouldn't last 2 weeks? Face professional killers with pepper spray and optimism? The sedan's rear door opened with mechanical precision. Leather interior, tinted windows, the subtle bulge of concealed weapons in door panels. Every detail reinforced the reality that entering this vehicle meant crossing a line she could never uncross. "Sarah," Vincent's voice carried unexpected gentleness. "I understand this isn't the life you chose, but it's the life you have now. I can keep you alive through what's coming, but only if you trust me completely." Trust. The word hung between them like an anchor thrown into dark water. How could she trust someone whose response to assassination attempts was counter-assassination? How could she rely on protection from someone whose world operated on principles that negated everything she'd been taught about justice and morality? But what choice remained? Vincent Torino was dangerous, possibly evil, certainly guilty of crimes that would horrify her under normal circumstances. But he was also the only person standing between her and death at the hands of people whose moral flexibility exceeded even his. Sarah stepped into the sedan. The interior smelled like expensive leather and subtle cologne, but underneath lurked something else. Gun oil. Fear. The metallic tang of violence that had become so routine it no longer registered as unusual. Vincent settled beside her with movements that never relaxed. never assumed safety even inside his own vehicle. "Drive," he told the man behind the wheel. Chicago's late-night streets blurred past tinted windows as they moved through neighborhoods Sarah recognized, then into areas she knew only by reputation. The safe house was located in Lincoln Park, a converted warehouse that looked abandoned from the outside but radiated the subtle signs of expensive security systems. Cameras disguised as architectural details, windows that reflected light wrong, the kind of invisible fortress that money and paranoia could construct. "How long?" Sarah asked as they pulled into an underground garage that opened only when their car approached. "Until Tony Torelli decides you're not worth the resources required to eliminate you. Until we neutralize his entire operation. Until you learn to blend into this world so completely that leaving becomes impossible." The third option carried weight that made Sarah's chest tighten with claustrophobic panic. Vincent was describing her gradual transformation from victim to participant, from witness to accomplice. Each day in his protection would make returning to normal life more difficult, until eventually, she'd become too valuable an asset to release. The elevator rose through floors of converted warehouse space toward what Vincent described as temporary accommodations. But Sarah understood that in his world, temporary often became permanent through the simple mechanism of accumulated dependence. How many other civilians had he rescued? How many had eventually become permanent residents of his carefully controlled empire? Vincent. She used his first name deliberately, asserting whatever small autonomy remained available to her. "When this is over, when I'm safe, you'll let me leave?" His gray eyes met hers with honest assessment of her question. "When this is over, Sarah, you'll understand why leaving would be the most dangerous choice you could make." The elevator doors opened onto luxury that belonged in magazines rather than safe houses. Hardwood floors, exposed brick walls, furniture that cost more than most people's cars. But luxury couldn't disguise the subtle signs of imprisonment. Windows that didn't open, doors that locked from the outside, the careful absence of anything that could be used as a weapon or communication device. "Welcome to your new life," Vincent said quietly. Dawn filtered through bulletproof windows, casting geometric shadows across hardwood floors that cost more than Sarah's annual salary. She'd spent the night cataloging escape routes that didn't exist, testing doors that wouldn't open, examining windows that were sealed shut with mechanisms she couldn't identify. The safe house was a beautiful prison designed by someone who understood that comfort could be more effective than bars. Vincent appeared at 7 sharp, carrying coffee in bone china cups that belonged in museums rather than hideouts. His charcoal suit showed no wrinkles despite what had clearly been a sleepless night coordinating responses to the previous evening's violence. The careful control he maintained over his appearance extended to his voice, his posture, even the precise way he set her cup on the marble counter. "Sleep well? Did you expect me to?" "No, but I hoped." He settled across from her at the kitchen island, maintaining careful distance while somehow still dominating the space. "We need to discuss what happens next." Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup, noting how the simple gesture felt like grasping the last remnant of normalcy in a world that had shifted beyond recognition. "You mean what you've decided happens next? Your input matters, within certain parameters." The qualification revealed everything about her new reality. Vincent was offering the illusion of choice while making clear that real decisions remained his prerogative. She could select from options he provided, express preferences he deemed acceptable, voice opinions that didn't challenge his authority. Democracy with predetermined outcomes. "How many people died last night?" Vincent's gray eyes didn't flinch from her direct question. 7. 3 at Romano's, 4 in related cleanup operations. 7 human beings erased from existence because she'd noticed suspicious behavior and spoken a warning. 7 families receiving news that their sons, husbands, fathers wouldn't be coming home. 7 funeral services that would never fully explain how death had arrived with such sudden finality. Their families will think it was random violence, gang territory disputes, drug deals gone wrong, the kind of senseless urban crime that makes people lock their doors and avoid eye contact. Vincent's voice carried no emotion, but his fingers tightened slightly around his cup. Clean deaths, professional. They didn't suffer. The clinical way he discussed murder made Sarah's stomach lurch with nausea and unwanted understanding. Vincent lived in a world where killing was business, where death was measured in efficiency rather than morality, where suffering was evaluated based on operational necessity rather than human compassion. "Does it bother you?" The question escaped before she could consider its implications. Killing people who were trying to kill me? No. His honesty cut through any pretense of noble motivation. Involving you in something that will change your life forever? Yes. The admission carried unexpected vulnerability, a crack in the armor he maintained against emotional connection. Vincent Torino was capable of regret, though his regrets centered on tactical complications rather than moral considerations. He mourned her lost innocence not because innocence had value, but because its destruction created operational difficulties. Tell me about Tony Torelli. Vincent stood, moving to the window with controlled energy that never quite suggested relaxation. Even in his own fortress, surrounded by loyal soldiers and sophisticated security systems, he maintained the hypervigilance of someone whose survival depended on constant awareness of potential threats. Torelli runs the Southside drug trade through a network of legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction companies, waste management. He's been expanding north, trying to claim territory my family has controlled for 3 generations. Family. Vincent used the word with casual authority, but Sarah caught the subtle emphasis that revealed deeper meaning. This wasn't just business competition. This was generational warfare. Blood feuds wrapped in corporate language, violence sanctified by tradition and territorial imperative. Last night was his opening move in what he hopes will be a quick war. Eliminate me, create power vacuum, move his people into my operations before my soldiers can organize effective resistance. But you survived, because you warned me, which makes you either the luckiest civilian in Chicago or the most dangerous. The distinction sent chills through Sarah's understanding. Vincent was evaluating her value as an asset against her risk as a liability, calculating whether her continued existence served his interests or threatened them. She'd become an equation in his strategic planning, her life balanced against operational efficiency. I want to call my sister. Your sister Rebecca, the pediatric nurse at Children's Memorial? Divorced, 1 daughter, lives in Evanston? Vincent's casual recitation of private details she'd never shared made her blood freeze with recognition of how thoroughly she'd been investigated. You've been watching me. For 6 months, since you started working at Romano's. He turned from the window, those gray eyes conducting their usual assessment. I needed to understand who had access to my routine, who could observe my habits, who might pose security risks. And your conclusion? Sarah Mitchell, 26, psychology degree from Northwestern, no criminal record, no political affiliations, no dangerous associations, parents deceased, minimal social circle, financial difficulties stemming from medical debt. Vincent recited her biography with the dispassionate precision of someone reading intelligence reports. Perfect civilian profile, which made you either completely harmless or expertly dangerous. The possibility that she might be a trained operative planted to infiltrate his routine spoke to paranoia levels that bordered on psychological dysfunction. But in Vincent's world, such paranoia was survival skill rather than mental illness. Everyone was potentially hostile until proven otherwise, and proof required constant surveillance and verification. What changed your assessment? Your reaction to identifying the surveillance team. Professional operatives would have found subtle ways to warn me without exposing themselves. You acted on impulse, genuine concern for someone you barely knew. That kind of moral reflex can't be trained or faked. Sarah absorbed his analysis of her character with growing unease. Vincent had classified her as harmless based on her capacity for spontaneous kindness. But that same kindness had trapped her in circumstances that demanded its abandonment. The qualities that made her safe to observe had made her dangerous to abandon. About your sister, Vincent continued. Phone calls can be monitored. Locations can be traced. Contact with family members creates vulnerabilities that enemies exploit. You're saying I can't talk to Rebecca? I'm saying contact with your family requires security protocols that take time to establish. Until we neutralize Torelli's operation, your sister and niece are safer if they believe you've temporarily disappeared. The casual way he discussed cutting her off from the only family she had left revealed the extent to which her life was no longer her own. Vincent was making decisions about her relationships, her communications, her basic human connections based on operational security rather than emotional necessity. How long? Weeks, possibly months. Torelli won't abandon his expansion plans because one assassination attempt failed. He'll regroup, try different approaches, escalate until either he succeeds or we eliminate him permanently. Eliminate permanently. Another euphemism for murder, delivered with the matter-of-fact tone Vincent applied to all business discussions. He was describing extended warfare that would continue until one side achieved total victory through the systematic destruction of the other. And during these weeks or months I live here, in this beautiful prison, you live under my protection, while learning to navigate my world. Eventually you'll understand that this isn't imprisonment, it's evolution. The word carried implications that made Sarah's chest tighten with claustrophobic panic. Vincent wasn't just protecting her from immediate danger, he was facilitating her transformation from innocent civilian to willing participant in activities that would have horrified her previous self. I won't become like you. You already have. His smile carried razor edges wrapped in silk. You saved my life knowing it would result in violence. You chose my survival over the lives of people trying to kill me. That makes you complicit in everything that happened afterward. The brutal logic of his argument cut through her moral certainty like acid through paper. She had made choices, and those choices had consequences that extended far beyond her intentions. 7 people were dead because she'd provided information that enabled their deaths. Her hands weren't clean, simply because she hadn't pulled triggers personally. Vincent approached with predatory grace, stopping close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the metallic undertone of suppressed violence. Welcome to the family business, Sarah. Now here's something that connects with our story. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where doing the right thing led to consequences you never anticipated? The moral complexity we're exploring here goes beyond simple good versus evil, doesn't it? Sometimes our choices create ripple effects that transform not just our circumstances, but our very identity. Drop a comment below sharing a moment when your good intentions led somewhere unexpected. And if you're finding this psychological tension as compelling as I am, consider subscribing. We're building a community that appreciates stories where heroes aren't always heroic, and villains aren't always wrong. 3 weeks in Vincent's gilded cage had taught Sarah the subtle rhythms of organized crime. The way conversations stopped when certain names were mentioned. How money moved through legitimate businesses without leaving traces. The careful choreography of violence that played out in euphemisms and unfinished sentences. She'd become fluent in a language she'd never wanted to learn. The morning brought news that changed everything. Torelli's dead. Vincent delivered the information while reviewing financial reports at his desk, his voice carrying no more emotion than if he'd announced the weather. Car bomb. Professional work. Very clean. Sarah's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as her hands began to shake. Another human being erased from existence. Another family destroyed. Another link in the chain of violence that had entangled her life beyond recognition. Did you order it? No. But I'm not surprised someone else did. Vincent looked up from his papers with those calculating gray eyes. Tony had made too many enemies. The drug expansion, the territory grabs, the sloppy assassination attempt on me. His own organization was losing confidence in his leadership. So this is over? Hope crept into her voice despite her efforts to maintain emotional distance. I can go home now? Vincent's silence lasted 3 seconds too long. In his world, where words were weapons and pauses carried meaning, those 3 seconds spoke volumes about her continued captivity. Sarah. His voice carried the gentle tone he used when delivering news that would shatter her remaining illusions. Tony's death doesn't solve our problem. It creates new ones. The careful way he said our problem made her stomach clench with recognition. Vincent had stopped pretending this was temporary protection. She'd become a permanent variable in his strategic calculations. Her freedom subordinated to operational security in ways that would never change. Explain. Power vacuums in our business don't stay empty. Tony's lieutenants are already positioning themselves to inherit his territory. Each one will want to prove their strength by completing his unfinished business. Vincent stood, moving to the window with restless energy that suggested controlled agitation. Killing me was Tony's obsession. It's become his legacy. Sarah absorbed this information with growing despair. Vincent was describing endless warfare, perpetual threats, a cycle of violence that would continue until every enemy was dead, or she became too valuable to release. Her temporary sanctuary was transforming into permanent exile from everything she'd once considered normal life. How many people want you dead? Currently, 12 that we know of, probably twice that number operating below our radar. His casual recitation of assassination threats spoke to paranoia levels that had become routine rather than pathological. It's the nature of leadership in this business. Power attracts challenges, and challenges require permanent solutions. Permanent solutions. Another euphemism for murder. Delivered with the dispassionate tone Vincent applied to all business discussions. He lived in a world where survival required the systematic elimination of threats, where peace was achieved through superior violence rather than negotiated settlements. "I want to see my sister." The request had become daily ritual, Sarah's attempt to maintain connection with her previous life, despite Vincent's security protocols. Each refusal chipped away at her sense of autonomy, but she continued asking because stopping would mean accepting complete surrender to his authority. Arranged. Vincent's unexpected agreement caught her off guard. Lunch tomorrow. Neutral location, discreet security. 1 hour maximum. The concession felt like victory, until Sarah recognized the tactical calculation behind his generosity. Vincent was allowing controlled contact, because isolation had served its purpose. She'd been separated from external influences long enough to begin accepting his world as normal, his values as reasonable, his protection as necessary. What's the catch? No catch, just conditions. Vincent turned from the window, those storm-gray eyes conducting their usual assessment. "You tell Rebecca you're consulting on a private security project, extended contract, confidential client, limited communication for professional reasons, lying to my sister, protecting your sister. The truth about your involvement with my organization would put her in danger she's not equipped to handle." The distinction revealed Vincent's talent for reframing moral compromises as practical necessities. Deception became protection, manipulation became security, control became care. He'd learned to package unpalatable realities in language that made acceptance easier. "And after lunch, you return here, continue your education and family business. Learn to navigate social dynamics that determine life and death based on perceived slights and historical grievances." Education. Vincent was describing her systematic indoctrination into criminal culture as if it were professional development rather than moral corruption. Each day in his world made returning to civilian life more difficult, until eventually the psychological distance would become impossible to bridge. The restaurant Vincent selected for the reunion sat in neutral territory, expensive enough to discourage casual surveillance but public enough to prevent dramatic confrontations. Sarah arrived with 2 discreet bodyguards who positioned themselves with clear sightlines to all entrances while maintaining the fiction of coincidental dining. Rebecca appeared precisely on time, her nurse's efficiency extending to personal appointments despite obvious concern about her sister's mysterious disappearance. 29 years old, dark hair pulled back in practical ponytail, wearing scrubs that carried the familiar hospital scent of antiseptic and controlled chaos. "You look different." Rebecca's first observation cut straight to dangerous territory. Expensive clothes, professional manicure like you've been somewhere with serious money. Sarah had prepared for this conversation, rehearsing explanations that contained enough truth to sound convincing while omitting details that would terrify her sister into calling police. But facing Rebecca's direct concern made deception more difficult than anticipated. Security consulting. Private client, very discreet, pays extremely well. "Since when do you know anything about security consulting?" Psychology degree translates to behavioral analysis, understanding how people think, predicting threat patterns, identifying suspicious activities. The explanation contained enough truth to sound plausible, though it omitted the part where such knowledge had trapped her in circumstances beyond her control. Rebecca studied her with the sharp attention she applied to pediatric patients whose symptoms didn't match their reported conditions. "Sarah, are you in some kind of trouble?" The question hung between them like a blade waiting to fall. Sarah understood that her answer would determine whether Rebecca accepted the fiction or pushed for dangerous truths. One sister trying to protect the other from realities that could destroy both their lives. No trouble, just opportunity that requires complete discretion. For how long? Indefinite contract. Client has ongoing security needs that could last months or years. Years. The word escaped before Sarah could consider its implications, revealing how completely she'd internalized Vincent's timeline for her captivity. She was no longer thinking in terms of temporary displacement but permanent relocation to a world where normal relationships became impossible luxuries. "I miss you." Rebecca's simple statement carried weight that made Sarah's chest tighten with grief for the sister relationship she was systematically destroying through necessary deception. "I miss you too." They finished lunch discussing safe topics. Rebecca's work at the hospital, her daughter Emma's progress in second grade, neighborhood changes that seemed trivial compared to the life and death calculations that now governed Sarah's existence. Normal conversation felt like visiting a foreign country where she'd once lived but could never return. Vincent waited in the sedan outside, his presence a reminder that even this brief contact with her previous life occurred under his supervision and control. The bodyguards materialized from their discreet positions, escorting her to the vehicle with professional efficiency that made her feel like valuable cargo being transported between secure locations. "How was it?" Vincent asked as they pulled away from the restaurant. "Painful." Sarah's honesty surprised her. She'd expected to maintain emotional distance, to treat the reunion as operational necessity rather than personal connection. Instead, seeing Rebecca had reminded her of everything she'd lost through her entanglement with Vincent's world. It gets easier. The lying, the distance. Eventually you realize that protecting people sometimes requires disappointing them. Vincent's philosophy reduced complex emotional relationships to tactical considerations. Love measured in terms of operational security rather than authentic connection. He lived in a world where caring for someone meant controlling their access to dangerous truths, where intimacy required systematic deception. "Is that what you're doing with me? Protecting me by disappointing me?" Vincent's gray eyes met hers in the rearview mirror's reflection. "I'm protecting you by teaching you to survive in circumstances you never chose but can't escape." The brutal honesty of his assessment left no room for romantic illusion. Vincent wasn't her savior or her captor, but something more complex. A teacher whose curriculum included lessons she'd never wanted to learn about power, violence, and the compromises required for survival in a world where moral absolutes became fatal luxuries. 6 months had passed since that first night at Romano's, and Sarah could no longer remember what normal felt like. She stood at Vincent's office window, watching Chicago's skyline transform under autumn light, her reflection overlaying the city like a ghost haunting familiar territory. The woman in the glass wore designer clothes that cost more than her former monthly salary, carried herself with confidence that came from understanding dangerous social dynamics, spoke in measured tones that revealed nothing of her inner thoughts. Vincent's world had remade her in its own image. The Calabrese situation requires delicate handling. Vincent's voice carried the weight of decisions that would determine whether people lived or died, based on perceived slights and territorial calculations. Marco's been skimming from the protection collections. Small amounts, but consistent pattern over 8 months. Sarah turned from the window, her movement automatic after months of participating in conversations where human lives were reduced to operational problems, requiring permanent solutions. How much? 47,000. More importantly, he's been recruiting allies within our organization, testing loyalty, identifying potential supporters for future challenges to my authority. The clinical way Vincent discussed betrayal spoke to paranoia levels that had become routine rather than pathological. In his world, loyalty was currency more valuable than money. Trust was luxury more dangerous than weakness. And betrayal was cancer that required surgical removal before it metastasized. "Your recommendation?" The question escaped automatically, Sarah's voice carrying authority she'd never intended to develop. Somewhere between observing Vincent's decision-making process and participating in strategic discussions, she'd begun thinking like someone whose opinions mattered in calculations of life and death. Marco dies. His supporters get one chance to renew their loyalty through concrete demonstration of value to family interests. Family interests. Vincent used the phrase with casual authority, but Sarah caught the subtle emphasis that included her in calculations she'd once found morally repugnant. She'd become part of the decision-making apparatus that transformed human conflicts into operational necessities. When? Tonight. Clean death, professional work, message clear enough to discourage future betrayals without appearing excessive to remaining organization members. Sarah absorbed this information without the horror that would have paralyzed her previous self. Vincent's systematic education in criminal psychology had taught her to evaluate violence in terms of tactical necessity rather than moral absolutes. Marco's death wasn't murder but pest control. His elimination required for organizational health rather than personal vengeance. The restaurant expansion in Chinatown. Sarah shifted topics with ease that would have appalled her former self. The Chen family's resistance creates operational complications. Vincent's gray eyes sharpened with interest. Sarah's contributions to strategic planning had evolved from reluctant observation to active participation, her psychology background providing insights into human behavior that enhanced his ability to predict and manipulate enemy responses. Elaborate, traditional honor culture, face-saving imperatives, generational authority structures. Direct confrontation validates their resistance narrative, makes compromise appear like submission to family elders. Sarah moved to the desk, spreading out neighborhood maps with casual familiarity. But economic pressure combined with face-saving alternatives could achieve compliance without violence. You're suggesting negotiation over elimination. I'm suggesting efficiency over symbolism. Dead enemies can't generate revenue or provide intelligence about competitor activities. Living enemies who become reluctant allies serve multiple strategic purposes. The cold calculation in her own voice sent distant alarms through whatever remained of her original moral framework. Sarah was discussing human manipulation with the dispassionate precision Vincent applied to all business problems, reducing complex cultural dynamics to tactical advantages in territorial expansion. Implement your approach. Chen family meeting tomorrow evening. Neutral location, discreet security presence. Vincent's acceptance of her strategic input represented evolution in their relationship, from protector-protected to operational partners. Sarah had become valuable enough to influence decisions that would shape criminal enterprises, affecting thousands of lives across Chicago's underground economy. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. Family dinner invitation for the following Sunday. Emma's birthday celebration. Casual request that carried emotional weight Sarah could no longer afford to acknowledge. 6 months of systematic deception had created distance that made authentic family relationships impossible to maintain. Problem? Vincent noticed her hesitation with the sharp attention he applied to everything. My niece's birthday. Rebecca wants family dinner. Decline. The Chen meeting requires preparation that takes priority over social obligations. The casual way Vincent dismissed her family relationships revealed how completely her priorities had shifted to align with his operational needs. Rebecca and Emma had become variables in security calculations rather than emotional connections requiring nurturing and protection. She'll ask questions about my continued absence from family events. Tell her the security consulting contract has entered critical phase requiring complete dedication, extended timeline, substantial compensation, professional opportunity that justifies personal sacrifice. More lies to layer upon months of systematic deception. Sarah had become expert at manufacturing explanations that contained enough truth to sound convincing, while concealing realities that would destroy her sister's faith in everything she'd believed about moral absolutes and family loyalty. Vincent. She used his first name deliberately, asserting whatever autonomy remained available within their carefully defined power dynamic. When does this end? His silence lasted exactly 5 seconds. In Vincent's world, where words carried lethal weight and pauses revealed strategic calculations, those 5 seconds answered her question more completely than extended explanation. It doesn't end, Sarah. It evolves. You've become too valuable to my operations, too knowledgeable about sensitive activities, too integrated into strategic planning to simply return to civilian life. The brutal honesty of his assessment left no room for romantic illusion about temporary displacement or eventual liberation. Vincent was describing permanent transformation, her evolution from innocent bystander to criminal accomplice, too complete to reverse through simple geographical relocation. So I'm a prisoner. Your family, and family members don't abandon each other when external pressures create operational difficulties. Family. Vincent's use of the word carried implications that made Sarah's chest tighten with claustrophobic recognition. She'd been adopted into criminal dynasty through circumstances beyond her control, her identity subsumed into collective enterprise that demanded absolute loyalty in exchange for protection and purpose. What if I refuse? What if I walk away despite the risks? Vincent approached with predatory grace, stopping close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the metallic undertone of suppressed violence. You won't. Why not? Because you've discovered something about yourself over these past months, something you never wanted to acknowledge but can no longer deny. His gray eyes conducted their usual assessment, reading micro-expressions and behavioral tells that revealed truths she'd tried to hide from herself. You're good at this, Sarah. The strategic thinking, the psychological manipulation, the calm evaluation of violence as problem-solving tool. You understand power dynamics in ways that most people never could, and you've learned to exercise that understanding without moral hesitation. The accusation cut through her remaining self-deception like acid through paper. Sarah had indeed discovered talents she'd never wanted to possess, found satisfaction in strategic victories that required other people's destruction, developed confidence that came from participating in decisions that shaped life and death based on operational efficiency. That doesn't make me like you. Vincent's smile carried razor edges wrapped in silk. No, it makes you exactly like me. The assessment hung between them like verdict delivered by judge who'd observed evidence she'd tried to suppress. Sarah had become someone capable of planning Chen family manipulation without moral qualms, someone who discussed Marco's execution as operational necessity, someone whose family relationships had been subordinated to criminal enterprise advancement. "Welcome home," Vincent said quietly. Outside, Chicago's autumn evening settled over the city like silk shroud, beautiful and suffocating. Sarah understood that she would never leave this window, never escape this view, never return to the innocent woman who'd served wine and noticed suspicious customers in a world that seemed comprehensible. The transformation was complete. What draws us to stories where good people make compromises that slowly reshape their moral landscape? Perhaps it's the uncomfortable recognition that we all possess the capacity for adaptation when survival demands it. Sarah's journey from innocent waitress to criminal strategist reflects choices we hope we'd never make, but understand we might under similar circumstances. If this psychological thriller resonated with you, I'd love to welcome you into our community of viewers who appreciate complex moral narratives. Subscribe not just for more content, but to join conversations about the thin lines between protection and control, between survival and complicity. What did you think about Sarah's final transformation? Was it inevitable, or could she have chosen differently? Share your thoughts below. These are the discussions that make storytelling meaningful.